What karma meant in the time of the Buddha. In the time of the Buddha, this intuition was everywhere. Farmers watched seeds disappear into the soil and trusted that something unseen would return in time. Kings ruled knowing that cruelty bred rebellion. Wanderers observed how a single angry thought could sour an entire day, while a gentle word could open doors that force never could. Karma was not first understood as a cosmic accounting system or a metaphysical threat. It was felt, lived, and observed as intimate as breath, as ordinary as walking. In the quiet spaces of our lives, beneath the noise of ambition and the constant hum of wanting more, there is a feeling many carry without naming. It is the sense that something unseen is shaping our days, that our joys and sorrows do not arise by accident, that our lives are not merely a sequence of random events. People have always felt this, long before philosophy had names, before doctrines hardened into systems. Human beings sensed a moral texture to existence, a gravity that followed action, the way a shadow follows the body at dusk. Yet over centuries, the word has grown heavy. Karma is often spoken of today as punishment or reward, fate or destiny, a moral ledger maintained by the universe itself. People fear it, bargain with it, or dismiss it as superstition. But in the Buddha's time, karma meant something far simpler and far more demanding. It pointed not to the future alone, but to this very moment. It asked not what would happen to you someday, but what you are becoming now. To understand karma, as it was known then, we must let go of many ideas we have inherited. We must listen not as collectors of beliefs, but as human beings who suffer, choose, act, and live with the consequences of those actions, whether we name them or not. In this listening, karma begins to speak again, quietly, without threat or promise, as a mirror held up to the heart. In the world into which the Buddha was born, the idea of karma was already ancient. It did not begin with him. The people of northern India spoke of action and consequence as naturally as they spoke of fire burning or water flowing downhill, but their understanding was shaped by ritual and social order. Karma was closely bound to sacrifice, caste, and obedience to tradition. One performed certain actions, often ceremonial, to secure a favorable outcome, prosperity, a better rebirth, protection from misfortune. Action mattered, but intention was often secondary to form. What he offered was not a rejection of karma, but a profound reorientation. Karma, as he understood it, was not primarily about what one did with the body, but what moved the mind. Action was no longer defined by outward appearance alone, but by intention, by the inner movement that gives birth to speech and deed. This was a quiet revolution. It shifted moral responsibility from society to the individual heart. The Buddha stepped into this world, not as a rebel shouting against belief, but as a careful observer of human suffering. He watched how people clung to rituals while remaining inwardly restless. He saw how moral systems could be used to justify privilege, cruelty, and indifference. And he noticed something more subtle, that suffering persisted even among those who followed the rules perfectly. Something was missing. In this view, karma was not fate imposed from outside. It was not a sentence handed down by a cosmic judge. It was a natural process, unfolding moment by moment, shaped by greed, aversion, and confusion, or by generosity, kindness, and clarity. Just as a flame leans in the direction of the wind, the mind leans in the direction of its habits. Karma described this leaning. This understanding stripped away both fear and complacency. Fear fell away because karma was no longer an unpredictable force lurking in the future. It was visible now, in the state of one's own heart. Complacency fell away because no one could hide behind tradition or belief. Liberation and suffering were not rewards or punishments. They were directions the mind could move toward or away from, again and again. Consider how this would have sounded to someone living at that time. If karma is intention, then no ritual can cleanse a cruel heart. No social status can protect a mind consumed by hatred. And no past mistake can condemn someone who turns toward wisdom and compassion now. Karma becomes immediate, intimate, and deeply ethical. It cannot be outsourced. It must be lived. The Buddha spoke to farmers, merchants, courtesans, soldiers, kings, and outcasts. And to all of them, karma meant the same thing. Your life is shaped by what you repeatedly choose, not once, not in grand gestures alone, but in the small, unnoticed moments where the mind inclines toward grasping or letting go. Karma was not dramatic, it was subtle. It unfolded in the tone of one's thoughts, the quality of one's attention, the way one met pain or pleasure. Importantly, karma, in the Buddha's time, was never meant to explain everything. He did not use it to justify illness, poverty, or tragedy. Not all suffering, he observed, comes from past action. Bodies age, accidents happen, societies collapse. To blame karma for all pain would be another form of ignorance, a way of avoiding compassion. Karma explained ethical causality, not the totality of existence. What it did explain was how suffering perpetuates itself internally, how anger, once indulged, becomes easier to return to, how craving, once fed, grows hungrier, how kindness, once practiced, softens the heart and changes the way the world is perceived. Karma was not about controlling the universe. It was about understanding the mind. In this light, karma becomes less a doctrine and more an invitation to awareness. Each moment asks a quiet question. What is the quality of intention here? Is this action rooted in fear or understanding? Is this word born from care or from the need to defend an image of self? These questions were not asked to judge, but to awaken. To live with this understanding of karma is to live attentively. It is to recognize that every moment of consciousness leaves a trace, shaping what follows, not as a moral threat, but as a natural truth. Just as walking in one direction eventually leads to a destination, thinking and acting in certain ways leads the heart toward peace or toward unrest. For the Buddha, karma was inseparable from freedom, because if actions arise from intention, and intentions can be known, then they can also be transformed. No being is locked into their past. No identity is final. Even the most deeply conditioned mind carries the possibility of change. This was the radical hope embedded in his teaching. Not hope for a better future world, but for a different way of inhabiting this one. In the time of the Buddha, karma was not an abstract law, discussed in isolation. It was part of a larger inquiry into suffering and its end. It pointed inward, not outward. It did not ask for belief, but for observation. Look and see what happens when the mind clings. Look and see what happens when it releases. In that seeing, karma reveals itself, not as a story about past lives or future rewards, but as the living texture of experience itself. In this understanding, the mind was not a static thing. It was a process, a flow, a river shaped by countless small currents. Every intention left a trace, not as a moral stain, but as a tendency. A mind that repeatedly grasped, learned how to grasp more quickly. A mind that frequently softened, learned how to rest more easily. Karma described this learning, the way consciousness trained itself through repetition. This is why the Buddha spoke so carefully about intention. Not intention as a grand plan, but as the almost invisible impulse beneath thought. Before a word is spoken, there is an urge. Before a hand moves, there is a feeling. Before a story about the self solidifies, there is a flicker of identification. Karma lived here, in these thresholds, and because it lived here, it could be known. To understand karma as it was lived in the Buddha's time, we must move even closer, closer than philosophy, closer than belief, into the intimate terrain of the mind itself. For the Buddha, karma was not primarily something that happened to a person. It was something that unfolded through a person. It arose where attention met experience, where feeling gave rise to response. It was born in the instant before action, in the subtle turning of the heart toward or away from what was present. The Buddha did not ask people to suppress these movements. He asked them to see them. Seeing was the beginning of freedom. Because when an intention is seen clearly, it loosens its grip. It no longer masquerades as necessity. Karma, in this sense, was not fate. It was habit illuminated. In the forests and villages where the Buddha taught, people did not sit with notebooks analyzing doctrine. They listened, then returned to their lives. They argued with spouses, bargained in markets, cared for children, buried their dead. Karma was tested in these ordinary moments. When anger arose, did it harden into speech? When desire stirred, did it command action? When fear appeared, did it narrow the world? This illumination carried a quiet but profound ethical weight. If suffering arises from conditioned responses, then responsibility does not lie in blaming the world, the gods, or the past. It lies in understanding how suffering is continually renewed in the present. This was not blame in the ordinary sense. It was empowerment. The recognition that while we cannot control everything that happens to us, we participate deeply in how it shapes us. In the Buddhist time, many people believed that their lives were largely determined by past actions in previous births. While the Buddha did not deny continuity across lives, he refused to let it overshadow the immediacy of practice. What mattered most was not what had been done long ago, but what was being done now. Karma was alive, breathing, responsive. Each moment carried weight, because each moment carried choice. Consider how this differs from modern misunderstandings. Karma is often invoked today as explanation after the fact. This happened because of karma. In the Buddha's time, karma was rarely used to explain events. It was used to understand process, not why something occurred, but how suffering continued or ceased. It was forward-looking, not backward, This emphasis transformed the meaning of moral life. Ethics were no longer commandments imposed from outside. They became expressions of understanding. One refrained from harming not because punishment awaited, but because harming hardened the heart and obscured clarity. One cultivated kindness, not to earn merit, but because kindness aligned the mind with peace. Karma thus became experiential rather than theoretical. One could feel its effects directly. At the heart of this teaching was a radical insight. The self that seems to act, choose, and accumulate karma is itself unstable. Intentions arise, but there is no permanent owner behind them. Actions occur, but no fixed identity stands apart from the flow. Karma functioned without a soul to carry it, just as a flame passes from one candle to another without something solid traveling between them. This challenge deeply held assumptions. If there is no enduring self who receives the results of action, the Buddha answered not with metaphysics, but with experience. The results are received by the process itself. Just as today's thought conditions tomorrow's mood, today's intention conditions tomorrow's perception. Continuity exists without permanence. Responsibility exists without a fixed entity. This distinction mattered deeply. When karma is used to explain misfortune, compassion easily disappears. Suffering becomes deserved. In the Buddha's teaching, This was a grave error. Suffering was something to be understood and alleviated, not explained away. Karma was not a tool for judgment, it was a tool for liberation. This understanding softened both pride and despair. Pride softened because there was no permanent self to glorify. Despair softened because there was no permanent self to condemn. Karma became impersonal, yet intimate. It belonged to no one, yet shaped everything. For those who listened deeply, this shifted the entire orientation of life. One no longer lived as a character, accumulating merit points across lifetimes. One lived as awareness, learning to respond more skillfully. Life became a practice, not a performance. Each moment offered a chance to incline the mind toward clarity, rather than confusion. Silence played an important role here. In the quiet of meditation, people saw intentions arise without invitation. They saw how quickly the mind grasped at pleasure or recoiled from pain. They noticed how stories formed, how identities solidified. Karma was no longer abstract. It was visible in real time. And with visibility came choice. This choice was gentle, not forced. The Buddha did not demand perfection. He spoke of gradual training, like shaping wood or tuning a string. Too tight, and it breaks. Too loose, and it makes no sound. Karma unfolded in this middle way, responsive, patient, grounded in attention. To live with this understanding was to walk through the world with care, not anxiety about consequences, but sensitivity to causes. One learned to ask not, "What will I get from this?" but "What does this cultivate?" Does this thought cultivate freedom or bondage? Does this action cultivate peace or agitation? In the Buddha's time, karma was thus inseparable from mindfulness. Without awareness, karma operated blindly. With awareness, it became a path. This is why liberation was possible, not because the past was erased, but because the present was no longer enslaved to it. As this understanding deepened, karma revealed its most subtle dimension. Even wholesome intentions, when clung to, could become binding. Pride in goodness, attachment to virtue, fixation on spiritual identity. These two created movement, restlessness, becoming. Ultimately, karma pointed beyond itself, toward a freedom not dependent on accumulation at all. But that freedom was not reached by denying karma. It was reached by understanding it so completely that the mind no longer needed to lean. When intention no longer grasped, karma ceased to propel. This was not annihilation, but peace, not escape from life, but intimacy with it unburdened by compulsion. In this way, karma in the Buddha's time was never meant to be a comforting explanation or a threatening doctrine. It was a mirror held steadily before the mind. It asked for honesty, patience, and courage. And for those willing to look, it offered something rare, the possibility that suffering was not inevitable, and that freedom was not elsewhere, but quietly waiting in the quality of this very moment. As the understanding of karma deepened in the Buddha's time, it led not to certainty, but to humility. The more clearly people saw the mechanics of intention and consequence, the less eager they became to explain the world. Karma was not a story to be told about others. It was a discipline of attention applied inwardly. And this inward turn changed the very meaning of spiritual life. One of the most subtle insights the Buddha offered was that karma does not operate only through dramatic actions. It moves through the quiet habits of perception, how the mind interprets experience before thought even forms. A harsh word may cause harm, but so can a silent judgment. A generous gift may bring joy, but so can a moment of sincere listening. Karma was happening long before morality became visible. This is why the Buddha emphasized training the mind rather than perfecting behavior alone. Behavior could be refined through discipline, but without understanding, it remained fragile. When circumstances changed, old habits return. But when perception itself softened, when the mind learned to see clearly without clinging, action followed naturally. Karma was no longer managed. It was transformed at the root. This perspective dismantled spiritual ambition. One could not chase awakening as an achievement without generating more karma. Wanting to become enlightened was itself a form of becoming. The path required patience with this paradox, effort without grasping, discipline without self-construction. Karma was refined until even the desire to manipulate karma was seen and released. The Buddha often compared the mind to a fire. It burns because it is fed. Remove the fuel and it goes out. Karma was the act of feeding craving, aversion, and ignorance with attention and belief. Liberation was not about destroying the fire, but about understanding how it burned. When that understanding matured, the feeding stopped on its own. In daily life, this transformation looked unremarkable. A person paused before speaking. Another noticed resentment arise and did not feed it. Someone else felt desire tighten the chest and chose not to obey it. These moments did not feel heroic. They felt ordinary, almost invisible. Yet this was where liberation took shape. Karma unraveled not through force, but through non-participation. This insight protected the teaching from turning into moral rigidity. Good and bad actions were understood as skillful or unskillful, not as absolute categories. The emphasis was always on effect. Does this lead to clarity or confusion? Does it lessen suffering or entangle it further? Karma was pragmatic. It cared little for labels and much for results. Because of this, compassion naturally deepened. When people saw how conditioned their own actions were, blame lost its appeal. One recognized ignorance in others because one had seen it so clearly in oneself. Karma did not divide the world into the righteous and the fallen. It revealed a shared vulnerability. All beings act from conditions they often do not fully understand. In this way, karma functioned as both teacher and boundary. It taught through consequence, but it also revealed its own limits. As long as intention aimed at becoming something, even something noble, movement continued. Peace lay not in perfecting intention, but in understanding its nature so thoroughly that it no longer compelled. From this recognition arose a quiet tenderness. Harmful actions were still discouraged, but without hatred. Responsibility remained, but without condemnation. Karma demanded accountability without cruelty. This balance was rare then, and it is rare now. It requires strength without hardness, clarity without arrogance. This freed people from bargaining with life. They no longer practiced goodness as insurance against pain. They practiced because it aligned the heart with truth. When suffering came, as it inevitably did, it was met without bitterness. Karma did not promise protection from change. It offered a way to meet change without being destroyed by it. The Buddha's teaching on karma also dismantled the fantasy of control. While intention shapes experience, it does not command outcomes. One can act with care and still encounter loss. One can speak kindly and still be misunderstood. Karma was never a guarantee of success. It was a commitment to integrity amid uncertainty. As practitioners matured in this understanding, a profound simplicity emerged. Life was no longer lived as a project to be perfected. It became something to be met. Karma ceased to feel like a weight from the past or a threat from the future. It became a description of how attention moves, how habits form, how freedom becomes possible. This remembrance did not require isolation from the world. Many of the Buddha's followers lived ordinary lives. They worked, raised families, faced illness and death. Karma was not an escape from these realities. It was a way of inhabiting them with less confusion. The world remained imperfect, but the heart became less entangled. In the deepest sense, karma in the Buddha's time was inseparable from wisdom. Not conceptual wisdom, but the kind that arises from seeing clearly again and again. Seeing how suffering is made, seeing how it ends, seeing how easily the mind forgets, and how gently it can remember. Eventually, for those who walked this path fully, karma fulfilled its final function. It pointed beyond itself. When intention no longer clung, when action no longer sought identity, when perception rested without grasping, karma lost its momentum, not because it was denied, but because it had been understood completely. This cessation was not dramatic. It did not announce itself. It felt like relief, like setting down a burden one had been carrying without knowing it. The world did not disappear. Experience continued. But the sense of being pushed and pulled by it faded. Karma, having done its work, fell silent. This was not the end of ethical life, but its fulfillment. Action still occurred, but it arose from clarity rather than compulsion. Compassion flowed without calculation. Wisdom expressed itself without needing confirmation. Karma no longer bound, because there was nothing left that needed binding. When we listen carefully to what karma meant in the time of the Buddha, something quiet begins to shift inside us. The word loosens its grip as a threat, as a cosmic judgment, as a story about what we deserve. What remains is simpler and more demanding. A recognition that our lives are shaped, moment by moment, by how we meet experience. Not by fate, not by invisible reward or punishment, but by the quality of attention we bring to what is here. Karma, in this original sense, is not about control. It does not promise safety or guarantee happiness. It asks instead for intimacy with life as it unfolds. It invites us to notice how quickly the mind reaches for certainty, how easily it turns discomfort into resistance, how habit masquerades as necessity. And in that noticing, a small space opens, a pause, a freedom that does not depend on circumstances changing. In this way, the Buddha's teaching on karma was not a theory about existence. It was a map for freedom. It began with responsibility and ended with release. It asked for honesty rather than belief, observation rather than explanation. And for those willing to walk it patiently, it offered something radical and rare: the possibility of living without being driven by the past or haunted by the future. For those who walked with the Buddha, karma was not an abstract doctrine. It was a daily practice of remembering to pause, remembering to see clearly, remembering that suffering is not an identity, and that freedom does not require becoming someone else. It begins where we already are, in the texture of this breath, this thought, this choice. This is why the teaching has endured. Not because it offers answers to every question, but because it points toward a way of living that reduces harm without hardening the heart. It reminds us that even in a world shaped by loss and uncertainty, we are not powerless. We may not choose what arrives, but we participate deeply in how it passes through us. In our own time, crowded with noise and urgency, this understanding may feel both ancient and urgently relevant. We are surrounded by explanations, judgments, and narratives about who is to blame and what must be fixed. Karma, as the Buddha knew it, turns us gently away from that noise and back toward responsibility without resentment, effort without aggression, care without fear. May your attention be kind. May your actions be clear. And may the understanding of karma not weigh you down, but gently set you free. If these reflections have touched something in you, not as belief, but as recognition, you are not alone. Many continue to walk this path quietly, learning again and again how to meet life with less grasping and more clarity. If you wish to explore these teachings further, to sit with them slowly and let them unfold, I invite you to remain here, to follow this channel, and to walk together in reflection.